Hi everyone, it's Anna, Riverlink's Education Coordinator through AmeriCorps. In this video today, I'm going to be sharing with you an at-home way to do a stream table lesson. Now, at Riverlink, we have a big fancy stream table made by EM Rivers that we take to schools where we can simulate streams using a recurring system. So we have a pump that uses 25 gallons of water and pushes it up a tube towards the top of our stream table and then brings it down and then it repumps it back up. But you don't need all of that fancy equipment to be able to make this stream table lesson at home. So I'm going to be sharing with you some of the materials that you can use, doing a demonstration of the materials that I have to use as a stream table, and showing you some of the topics that we usually talk about during our stream table lessons. So for a stream table lesson, you only really need 3 basic things, but you can have some additional items as well to kind of add to the experience. The first thing that you need is something to hold your sediment and the water to act as your stream table. Now you can use kind of any type of thin, long container. You can use one of those under the bed storage containers like this one. You can use a pan if you have one at home that you don't use for cooking a lot or that you would wash really well afterwards. Or you can use one of the aluminum baking pans that are oftentimes a one-time use, but you can kind of repurpose it for your stream table. That's what I'm going to be using today. I'll show you that in just a moment. Then the other of the 3 things that you need is some type of sediment, something to act as your substrate. Now this can be some soil from your yard if you have the ability to go dig in your yard. I live in an apartment, so I don't. So I'm going to be using hermit crab sand. So I'll show you the bag that I'm using here. And it works really well for our stream table. With our stream table at Riverlink, we have microplastics that were made by EM River, and we use microplastics rather than some type of natural substance because we store it often and it doesn't always get to dry out in between using the stream table. And so since it's plastic, it's not going to be growing bacteria and mold, so that's something to think about as well if you're going to be using your stream table and keeping it for a while, to keep reusing to make sure that it has a chance to dry out, or that you have that ability to do that so that you don't grow mold in your stream table. So you need some type of storage container for your stream table. You need sand or some type of substrate to use. I've seen on lessons online when I was looking up stream table activities, some people have used ground up walnut shells, so you can get kind of creative with it, whatever you have available to you. And then the last thing that you need really is water, and I'm going to show you the water that I'm using. I have dyed my water with blue food coloring just to make it a little bit easier to see on the video, but you don't have to do that, of course. You can use a container like that to just pour the water out. You can use your hose if you want to have a continuous stream of water, whatever you have available to use, but you need a container, some type of substrate like sand, and then water. That's really basically all you need for it. You can use additional things as well. You can use a filter or some type of net so that you can poke holes in one end, so the downstream end of your container, and have the water flow through that, and then you can use a net to catch any of the substrate that goes through. You can use a second container to just have everything fall into there, whether it's water and sand. Or you can just keep everything contained and don't have any sort of kind of output for your container, but you'll kind of fill up a little ocean on the downstream end of your container that way. So good thing to keep in mind. Now I'm going to turn the camera around and show you my setup for a stream table. Okay, so this is my stream table setup. So as you can see, I'm using one of those aluminum baking pans as my stream table. I have my hermit crab sand all set up as a little landscape. I'm using tiny Monopoly houses as my kind of community here. So if you have any type of figurines or any type of Monopoly games, you can feel free to use those to kind of add to your stream table experience. I'm also using a book in order to make an incline for my stream table. That way the water will flow downstream rather than kind of sit where it is. And then I have my water container right beside me ready to go. So on my landscape here, I've kind of made a path for my water to flow through. We'll see if it actually flows that way, if it goes a different direction. And then I have some kind of mountains for my houses to sit on, and then down here is where my water will collect. So I don't have any type of output for my stream table, but if you'd like to, that way you don't have a kind of ocean fill up, you can poke holes in the end or kind of drill a hole depending on the container that you're using, and then have something to catch the water and sand that goes through, a net to filter out the sand, and You can also, if you're outside and don't mind the water just pouring out, you can have it go into your yard. So just some things to think about in the setup for your stream table. Now usually when we do a stream table lesson, we have it set up like this, and then before we get the water flowing, we'll ask the students what they think the water is going to do, what path they think it's going to take. Oftentimes they'll say it's going to go down the path that we've laid out for it, and that's because water wants to move in the path of least resistance. It's going to go low, it can go over top the mountains, has to go around them. So just kind of making some observations and taking some hypotheses for what's about to happen, and then we can watch as the water starts to flow and see if it does those things or does something completely different. So kind of a good way to get in talking about hypotheses and seeing if they come out correct, and then any questions that come out afterwards. So that scientific process is a good thing to add into these lessons as well. What we also like to talk about a lot with our stream table lessons at Riverlink is erosion and sedimentation. We'll probably see that on our stream table today, so we usually have them watch out for that. Oftentimes it's a topic they've already talked about in school, but it's really important to talk about for Western North Carolina because sedimentation is a really big issue. It's the #1 source of pollution in the French Broad River. So when all of that soil gets eroded away from the side of the stream banks and ends up in the water, makes it really brown and murky. It's a big problem for animals that live in there that can't breathe as their gills fill up with all of that sediment and washes downstream too and affects those communities downstream of us, and then takes away from our stream banks, makes them really unstable and steep. So we talk about that process and things that we can do to prevent it, like having a lot of vegetation on our streams and having those roots of those plants and trees to hold that soil together, kind of act as a net and make it more stable. So lots of topics that we can add in as we go. Now for our stream table at Riverlink, we can add sponges. We have little plastic trees to kind of simulate that vegetation and that vegetated buffer that would be on the stream bank that can act as a soil stabilizer. But you don't have to do that, of course, or if you have the ability, have a sponge that you can cut up in your kitchen, or have some little plastic trees that you can use, then certainly add those to kind of build up your community. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start pouring our water, so we're going to see if it takes that path that I created for it, and we're going to watch out for some erosion and see what happens to our community. On our stream table at Riverlink, we can simulate a flood, so the water will pour faster and faster, and so you can kind of simulate that yourself too if you want to. Start off small, so that's what I'll do, and then pour the water faster and faster and kind of simulate a flood in your community and see what happens to it, see if there's more erosion and if the stream channel changes. So the stream's kind of going in two directions a little bit, but it's basically taking the path that I thought it would, and now it's going to fill up kind of a little ocean or lake down there. If you notice, when I stopped pouring a little bit, the water just kind of disappeared and went under. So you can simulate groundwater on these stream tables as well. And that's a really cool thing to talk about with students, letting them know that there's water basically everywhere that they go. Sometimes you have to just dig a little bit further down to get to it. Now, as our water is flowing, you can see it kind of cutting into our stream, and we had some erosion there that caused a landslide, so we have one house gone already. So you can talk about cut banks and point bars. Cut banks being the place where erosion is happening a lot, and so it's cutting away from the side of the stream bank. Point bars being those spots where sand is kind of building up. You can see that really well right here. Point bar on the left side, kind of creating a little sandy beach, and a cut bank on the right side. You can also notice that as I'm pouring the water faster, our stream is getting wider too, so a lot more erosion happening. I'm going to stop the water flow now. So quite a bit of erosion that we've had. We've had some of our houses fall into the river. So you can use this to talk about if you'd want to build on the side of a stream or a fast-flowing river, or if you want to be a little bit further away from that just in case of floods. You can talk about floodplains on here as well. So down in this end, if we had had more sand down here, but it was really low, it probably would have been a floodplain. Partly also because I didn't have an output for my water, but still a good way to kind of demonstrate those low-lying areas near streams and rivers where as a flood is happening and more water is filling up those streams and rivers, it's going to overflow into those floodplains. So those are some things we usually talk about with our stream tables: erosion and sedimentation, floodplains. We'll point out some of the parts of the streams and rivers like cut banks and point bars like I mentioned earlier. But you can really do a lot of experimentation with a stream table. You can test out different types of landscapes, you can try out different types of sediment or soil types in order to see the differences between those, the difference between like gravel or really rocky sediment versus sandy sediment. And then you can simulate floods, pouring the water faster and faster, and to see what happens to community during a big rain event. So lots of cool experiments that you can do with a stream table, testing out all types of questions and hypotheses. So that was just kind of one simulation of a stream table use. You can feel free to do something very similar to this, and let us know how it goes. Definitely ask us some questions if you would like any help trying to get something like this set up. But it's a really cool way to simulate streams and talk about floods and erosion and different parts of a river while you're at home using really not a lot of materials. Well, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.